Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third part to our webinar series discussing the Illinois dispensary application process, as well as the Application Accelerator product that some of you may have gotten. Today, we're going to discuss a lot more about some of the content regarding the Application Accelerator, specifically revolved around legal compliance and other types of documents that are required for the application, such as your principal officer's forms, and of course, how you're going to submit your application, how the proper way to do that. Our guest speaker here today is Lauren Payne. How you doing, Lauren?
I'm doing great. How are you
Good.
today?
Good. Lauren is a senior regulatory analyst here at Green Rush Consulting, and she's going to join us today on how to walk through some of these items I just mentioned to you a minute ago. But first off, I like to kind of go into some interesting aspects to this so that we can understand, this content and what you should edit and what you should not edit, regarding, specifically legal compliance. So I'm going to share my screen with you and show you some of these documents. Just give me one second. Okay, so if everybody can see the screen, right now I'm looking at Exhibit K, Operating Plan. You should have received a document similar to this after you have filled out your form and submitted your form online. After you submit the form, you receive this type of document in your email. One of the things that I want to immediately point out is that you're going to want to remove your client ID in your email at the top of the document that's in the header. So you're going to double click the header and you're going to remove that because that's not necessary for this document when you go to submit your application. Going forward, I do want to show you some areas that you may want to edit, and then things that you don't want to edit. So let's just start with what you don't want to edit. One of the important things that we have done for you already is done regulatory and legal compliance review over top of these documents. Here we have a legal citation that references this section here, saying that you're going to comply with the regulations when it comes to carrying out all the day-to-day operations associated with your dispensary. All these other legal citations in here too as well also reference that. So that way the State Department knows that any SOPs or anything that you're going to be doing, you're going to be doing within compliance. So it's very important to not do anything with any of these sections here without the support of your attorney or someone that understands the regulations. Otherwise, it could dock some points by not having some of these in there. So it's very important to pay attention as you're going through each exhibit that you focus on not editing any of these sections here, okay? Sections that you may want to edit is possibly here, like for instance, like with Focus or this Foundation of Cannabis Unified Standards. Even though they're a great organization, you may want to add additional organizations in here in terms of standards of excellence that you may be a part of, or associations that you may be a part of. So this sixth section here, you can actually go in and maybe do some edits there and add some more to the table when it comes down to the amount of information you're trying to provide. Here's another area here that could be edited as well. Local jurisdiction. Let's say that you already have a location or an area or geographical area or city or county that you already picked out. You can probably change that to that particular local jurisdiction because you're already targeting that place. So that would probably be okay to do so as well. This is just to give you a high-level overview of what you should and should not change. So just remember, anywhere where you see any of these legal citations, do not alter this without any type of assistance from an experienced attorney that understands the regulations of the state, okay? So I'm gonna flip it back and take my screen share off. And what do you think, LP? You wanna add anything to that?
I think that's really great overview. I do want to point out that a good way to tell what should and should not be edited is if it looks like it's confusing language or very technical, it's probably regulatory language. Another thing you can do is if you're not sure, you can look at a phrase and copy it and then go into the regulations. If you go to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations website, down towards the bottom of their screen, there's a link to open up the laws. And if you click on the law and you click on the view all laws at once so that you can search it, you can then do a find, Control F search for that phrase and see if it pops up. And then you know for sure it's in the legislation or regulation and you shouldn't edit it.
Right.
But yeah, also bullet points and numbered lists are usually directly from the regulation. Not always, but usually.
And see, this is to help the department understand that you are doing exactly what they're telling you to do. I mean, we had a session yesterday in security where they were discussing the same exact instruction, right? It's like we want to give the state exactly what they're looking for and maybe a little bit more, but we don't want to get too confusing about the type of content that's in there. So I think that's a really important factor to consider when you're editing these documents. Or having someone else edit these documents, and so it's really important to look at those different things. I think that's a really good point, LP. You could take that and find and search it in the regs. And actually, this would help educate you more on why there's regulations in there and that piece that's in there too as well, relating to that piece of requirement. So I think that's pretty awesome. We just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that as you're going forward, building content or editing content on any of these documents is important. Never adjust that unless you know what you're doing. So I'd like to move on right now to principal officers forms, and LP is going to help us understand that a little bit more. That's an actual form that's provided from the state. That's a requirement, but specifically principal officers in general, all the different requirements besides this form, there's a bunch of different things that each one of these principal officers have to go through. So LP, do you want to explain a little bit more about that for us? That'd be very helpful.
Absolutely. I know that principal officers can be a little confusing. The state didn't do a great job explaining what they were. I wanted to remind you guys of the, in middle school, when you were learning grammar, you may have learned that the principal of your school is your pal, and that's how you know how to spell the word properly. In this instance, your principal officers are also your pals, or at least they should be. And so be sure to spell principal properly. It's not the end of the world if it's misspelled, but it does look more professional if you're using principal officers properly. All of your principal officers will be publicly disclosed in the application. So if they have concerns about licensing or child custody issues, or their family and community finding out that they're part of a company that's applying for a license, they may want to rethink being on this application. They have to be over 21, and they generally can't have a conviction. There are a couple of exceptions, but in general, they shouldn't have a conviction. If you do have somebody on your team with a conviction that you're not sure is okay, feel free to contact us. I'm going to give you our contact information at the end of this webinar. You can only be listed on 10 individual licenses as a principal officer. You can apply for more than 10, but yeah, it gets complicated after that. So you may want to have a frank conversation with your principal officers to see if they're applying with other teams. Generally, oh, sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, okay, so let's just say, I think would it be a disqualification if let's just say one of the principal officers wanted more than 10, but they're on your application? That was one of the things I was thinking about. I would imagine that'd be a disqualification, right?
No, actually, the state has said that it's okay to apply for multiple, but then there's going to be something that happens afterwards. And there's a few steps that happen with respect to deciding which licenses, you move forward with.
Oh, so they get to select the ones they just can't get a more of 10, but they can select it, but it's not going to be a disqualification. Is that correct? Okay, got it. Okay. You want, okay, that makes sense. Just was checking on that.
All right.
How about like, some of the things in terms of like including their compensation or contracts, or explain a little bit about that, like, because there's a lot of work when it comes to creating MOUs and these types of relationships. This is probably a very complicated area, because there's a lot of corporate structuring involved, various things that happen that the state's asking for. So can you explain a little bit more about that and to our viewers so they understand it a little bit more?
Sure, I'll talk about what is required of principal officers, but first I want to talk a little bit about the definition. Who's a principal officer? The state has pretty broadly defined it, and in our opinion that's actually good, because the state also said that only principal officers can count towards your skills and experience section. So that means that if you're submitting resumes in exhibits B and N. You can only do that for principal officers. So because the state so broadly defined principal officer, basically if they're on your team and you're wanting them to help make decisions for the company, then they're a principal officer. And all principal officers have a bunch of things they have to do. They have to disclose their relationship with your company, so they have to apply using that form. But they also, you as the applicant are going to have to include things like your compensation agreements or MOUs when you fill out that application form. So make sure that all the documents that you've executed with your principal officers are also included in Exhibit B. And that instruction exists in a few of the documents we've sent, but if you have any questions about it, let us know. Other things that you have to, that principal officers have to do is they need to give you their resume. You may want to edit it a little. You will have to edit it into an anonymous version for Exhibit N. So you're going to have 2 sets of resumes. Each resume is 3 pages, and they should basically match. But the one that doesn't have names, we're going to talk about anonymity in a little bit, but the ones that don't have names, they should look very similar to the ones for Exhibit B. As far as additional things, they have to get fingerprinted. We sent out some instructions for out-of-state team members for fingerprinting. Fingerprinting can take a little bit more time than you think it will, so we don't recommend doing it on December 30th in case of hiccups.
Right.
And then the last is that form that you were mentioning. It needs to be notarized. It can't, like, once you get it notarized, you can't change it. You would have to re-notarize it or start over.
It's a pretty simple form though, right? I mean, like, for looking at it, it's a pretty simple form, just asking for general information, but it does need to be notarized. And, you know, do you need to place the exhibit stamp at the top of that form too as well? And that's another requirement, I believe, right?
Correct. Every single page of your entire application has to be stamped with that exhibit. So that's kind of fun thing to do, even though
it's not a physical stamp, but you actually could type it on, you know, put it on there. Just make sure it's labeled correctly. How about that?
Exactly. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that stamping procedure and later on today. But it's pretty frustrating that the state made this form and made that requirement and didn't put the stamp at the top of it.
Right. So coming back to resumes and principal officers, and, you know, and how it plays into like the knowledge and experience section. This is where I feel like it's very important to be able to select the right principal officers in order to score points in another exhibit, right? So having those right principal officers maybe have security experience or regulatory experience or cannabis experience or retail experience, maybe a pharmacist. I mean, there's multiple different ways you can look at that, but understanding that when you connect or you develop the relationship with them, you're applying with them, this also knowledge and experience applies to another exhibit, and that's really helpful. And you did say 2 versions of resumes, like one anonymous and one non-anonymous, which means that you have one that's normal and the other one you're just taking all the names out and just doing titles.
Yeah, but we recommend using titles for each person. And then you also have to remove the names of companies, which is really frustrating. And so you want to use some really descriptive words for the companies. You don't want to just say pharmacy. If they worked for CVS, you want to say nationwide chain with over X number of franchises or something like that. So really be descriptive. Also, make sure that the job descriptions are very descriptive and they really highlight. You don't want to use their standard resume. You may want to go through and edit it a little and really highlight their experience working in a regulated environment. Pretty much every company has some sort of regulation, even like restaurants. So you really want to talk about things like you mentioned security experience, also regulatory environments, inventory control experience, retail experience, or even managing people. So yeah.
That's excellent. I mean, I agree with you 100% on that. But anywhere you can actually add more, will add more to the overall application and obviously the overall score. And so that's a really critical point, LP. Thank you so much. So moving on, like, why don't we discuss, well, first off, there were some addendums that weren't necessary with this. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The principal officer form at the bottom of it lists addendums A through E. And later on in the FAQs, the state has said that addendums A, B, and C are actually unnecessary because they're also, that information is included elsewhere in the application. So you only need to do D and E. D being the fingerprints. And so you have to, for fingerprints, you need to submit the fingerprint consent form as well as the receipt. Make sure both of those items for each person are in Exhibit D, or excuse me, Exhibit B, Addendum D, right? Exhibit B.
Yeah, that's kind of
And
good.
then for Exhibit B, Addendum E, that's where you put your resumes. 3 pages per person, you can't go over that or they're gonna get upset.
Yeah, I know. And you know, another thing is with the fingerprints, it has to be done within 30 days. I know we had like a lot of questions about this because, you know, again, that's a little bit confusing. It's like they look at the 30 days and you would think that it's just, okay, I got to do this 30 days before, but it's within the 30 days of submission. So just to clarify that, fingerprints, 30 days within submission, okay?
Absolutely.
So moving on, let's talk a little bit about anonymity. I mean, it's kind of hard to say. Anonymity, and typically we call this redactions, and redacting, identifying information. Some states do identifiers and non-identifiers, but in this case, it's this. So tell us a little bit about that and where that really needs to take place. I mean, I think it's all throughout the entire application or in all exhibits. But explain some of the nuances between some of the outside exhibits and some of the forms where that needs to take place.
Absolutely. Just a reminder, we sent out an identifying information guide, and we're happy to resend that if you need it, but it outlines everything I'm about to talk about. There are a few exhibits that don't need to be anonymous, and those exhibits are A, which is your check, B, which is all of your principal officer forms and resumes, C, which I don't recall right now, O, which is proof of capital. However, O cannot have your identifying information on attachments, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but O can have some identifying information in it, P, and S, and T. So those exhibits can have names and contact information in them, but the rest of the application does need to be completely anonymous. And we're going to talk about 2 different types of removing identifying information. So there's de-identification, which is what we were talking about with the resumes. It's going into the resume and changing the words. And so in the narrative, we talk about roles. You don't want to put the people's names in that narrative. You want to just use their roles. And so that's kind of what we call de-identification, removing any sort of sign of who the person is. And then there's redaction, which is physically going into the PDF and blacking out the information. Now, most of the application requires the de-identification. The state says that you can only physically redact with that black mark on exhibits H and O. Exhibit H is the security contract, and you're going to redact your contact information, your names, your team's names, and your company's names. You're going to leave the security vendor information because that's what they want to see. And so that's for Exhibit H. And then for Exhibit O, if you include any bank statements or other proof of capital, you need to physically redact your contact information and account numbers. I'm not certain why they wanted the attachments to be redacted, since it is a section that they say doesn't need to be anonymous, but this is something that they said in the FAQs. And so we're making sure to tell everybody.
Right. I mean, again, this is another, a mechanism in which the state is using to avoid that favoritism, I believe, to where they, the connections between relationships between people, whether it's banks or security or whatever you want to look at, it's probably, most definitely why they're doing it. But again, just to reiterate what you said, it's just the applicant's information that you need redacted out of these 2 areas, or is it anything else besides that?
The applicant's information, company name, as well as other company names. If it's in an anonymous section, the state's got some pretty confusing language about when you can include company names and when you can't. So because of that, we are telling everyone to leave company names out completely, unless it's your track and trace vendor. Or something that the state specifically asked you to include, such as the security vendor in section H, or Exhibit H, excuse me.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then did you need to provide, I would imagine you need to provide book two copies of this too as well, like one copy that's unredacted and one copy that's redacted?
Only for the resumes. Everything else is just, you want everything to be de-identified for, excuse me, you want everything to be in one exhibit
Oh,
file in the PDFs. We'll talk
right,
about that in a minute.
right.
But no, you don't have to submit, with the exception of the resumes, you don't have to submit two versions like you would in other states.
Yeah, I mean, because that's pretty common in other states. What you see is that they want this, redacted, unredacted version, and then we have identified and de-identified versions. So I'm just wondering, for our viewers, just to make sure to make that clear, like, it's only for resumes that you need to do that with, and not these other two, which obviously that's kind of confusing because typically you write it down the line like that, and that's all for the blind scoring, method. So actually, I want to kind of open up the floor just in case there's any questions so far. I know there's somewhat complicated material, but I want to make sure that if anybody's got any questions, feel free to go into the chat box and ask us about everything we've discussed so far in terms of anonymity, as well as the principal officers forms or anything like that. So if anybody's got that, please let us know. So moving on, I think that there's a lot of tips and tricks when it comes down to this submission, but they also want you to package this in a certain way. And this is something that could actually impact you on points. It actually gets you disqualified if you don't do this appropriately. So we're going to go through some of these different, tips and tricks around how to do that, and also the guidelines on how to make sure that you submit this in its perfect form of what they're asking. So, LP, I'll let you kind of, take the floor on this one, because I know you have a great way of submitting things all the time for our company. So why don't you go ahead and explain to our viewers, from A to Z, like how do we package this up and how do we submit it correctly?
Thanks. I just wanted to jump back to anonymity one more time. If for people who are experienced in other states, especially Missouri, you may know that submitting an application that's supposed to be de-identified, if it had identifying information, it was a big problem and you could be disqualified. However, the state of Illinois is being super reasonable. If there's an error and you include information about someone that you shouldn't have, they'll send you what's known as a deficiency letter, and you'll have 10 days to fix it. Of course, it's not something you want to happen, but it's nice that they're being reasonable and letting you fix that particular type of error. Especially since they haven't been completely clear as to what needs to be de-identified.
Right. So that's really good. So that gives us a little bit of flexibility.
Absolutely.
But it always feels good to get it right the first time, right?
Absolutely.
So hopefully this next part of this, this session will help you guys clearly understand, step by step on how to, construct and arrange and collate all these documents in the exact form that the state's asking for. So, thank you, LP, for putting that out because it's a very important thing. We got one question here. Let's see what we got. One of the questions is, before we move on to the next one, one of the questions is, do we need proof of possible investors? What does the proof look like? We're waiting, in this case, this person's waiting to get capital until they get the license. Can they just submit the investment amount we have been told we will have once we get the license?
Actually, surprisingly, the answer in this state is yes. You can just say, we intend to have this much capital, and also mention that that it's enough capital to actually operate, which is what the state cares about. They want to know that you have the ability to operate, and that you're not just going to fall apart within 3 months of getting your license. They do not require proof of capital. They said that you can submit it if you'd like, but yeah, it's not required. So somehow, which is actually really wonderful for teams that may not have a lot of capital right now, but once they get the license, they'll see the investments roll in.
Yeah. And so, do you think? I mean, just to like piggyback on that, do you think that? I mean, I still think it's important to submit some type of financial projection or something, don't you think? I mean, I think just so you know that okay, we're going to be raising this amount of capital. We may not have it now. We may be trying to go for one of these grants or loans too. But we want to show you that we know what we're doing and know what we're thinking about in terms of how we're doing this. Right?
Absolutely. You do want to submit pro formas and other information for Exhibit O. There's a whole list of things that the state has said that that you need to do for Exhibit O. And we recommend putting as much detail as you can, including things like how much you intend to budget for things like staffing and training. So I know that some of that is referenced in some of the other parts of the application. We talk about training, and we talk about training budgets and staffing budgets, but for Exhibit O, definitely include as much detail about how you're going to prove in the future that your investment is enough to.
Yeah, and just, the further that detail, I always thought that, if you did have investment, my first question would be, how do you, what does that look like? Is it a certified CPA letter? Is it just a bank statement? What in your opinion, what do you think that is in terms of that documentation?
Because the state's been very flexible with respect to capital, you could probably use a letter from a CPA or a bank statement. You could get a letter from your bank if you don't want people seeing your bank statement. You can get a letter from your bank saying that you have at least X number of dollars in the bank.
What about a letter of credit?
You can definitely use letters of credit. And in this state, because they have been flexible, you can use things that actually change in value, things like stocks and bonds. I've seen brokers reports and balance sheets used as well as for proof of capital. Any way that you can think of that's somewhat official, that's not coming from you. You're not generating it, but somebody else who has a reputation in the community to uphold is willing to fill out for you.
Or is licensed, like a licensed CPA or even a financial institution, all that makes sense. So, and when you piece those things together, when you think about financial projections of your dispensary, and you think about, this investment letter, if you are submitting investment letters or you have investment, in this case, that number should be a lot more than what the financial projections say, how much you're going to spend in terms of the capital expenditures and all these different things and how you're going to operate, right? So you always want to make sure it's not, this side isn't less than this side. Then you're going to say, okay, well, how are you going to have the money to do this? And that could impact your score or impact, how you're represented. So it's a very important thing to understand. Make sure these projections are less than how much you're raising. So that's excellent. It's an excellent segue. We went into a little bit of financials and love it. Do you want to kind of move into some of this final submission aspects, LP, and just kind of start, explaining to our viewers, how do we package this up?
Absolutely. I want to reiterate something that Zeta said at the very beginning because it's kind of important. Make sure to remove the headers from your template documents that we sent you. You don't want your GreenRush client ID number or your email address in there because that might not be, that might be considered, especially if your email address has your name in it, that means that it's identifying and you don't want it in there. Moving on, you're going to need to turn each exhibit into one PDF, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that in a second. But they also need to be labeled in the file name, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, etc. So in order to turn your narrative documents from GreenRush Consulting or other Word files or other image files into a PDF, your computer can do it for you. You don't have to go online and get one of those convert to PDF programs. If you're working in Word, what you do is you go to File and then Save As, and then at the bottom of that, you're going to see a place to change the extension of the file name. So normally the default in Word is doc.doc or .docx. You click on the arrow next to that, and there will be a drop-down menu, and it'll say PDF, and you click on PDF, Save As, and then it's a PDF.
Yeah, same thing with, we did have some questions around, using Google Suite, Google Docs, and that's exactly how she explained it. That extension, that's the extension you want to open up in Google Docs, because Google Docs is a common form of what people use to share documents. Maybe you have a lot of people on your team that you're sharing these documents with. You're not using Word, or you don't like Word, or however you want to look at it. Well, you can take that and open it up as a docx into Google Docs, and all your highlights will show up of where you had all your answers. That's a really important aspect to this as well. And the same thing is, you just file, save as PDF, compress as a PDF too as well.
Absolutely. Also, Google Docs will allow you to download as, so you don't even have to edit it. You can download it as a PDF and then it's ready to go.
And then one final thing too, as well, you also want to remove all your highlights. So just get rid of all your highlights before you compress it as a PDF. And those highlights really help you understand how to, make sure that you've gotten all your answers done. You may have answered, to be determined in some of those answers. And, I think that helps you as an accounting system to help you understand, okay, I haven't answered this yet. So now before I compress it to PDF and package this up, I got to first answer the question, and then remove all the highlights before I do so. So that's fantastic. Thanks for bringing that up.
Absolutely. Moving on, you're going to take those PDFs and stamp every single page. The state calls it stamp. Some people call it headers, but the state says that you need to stamp every single page of every single exhibit with the exhibit name. So exhibit A, exhibit B. They've also said that while they don't actually require the stamp to be in the upper right hand corner, that's their preference. So in order to edit the PDFs to put this stamp in there, as well as if you wanted to add page numbers or do your physical redaction, you can use Adobe if you have Adobe. If you have a Mac, you can use Preview. If you don't have either of those already, we recommend downloading the Adobe Trial and use that, because it's really the gold standard for editing PDFs, and you'll get a much easier to read document. It won't be corrupted, or you won't run into problems later on.
Right. Do you think it'd be easier though to just do it in Word before you compress it to PDF? Just put the name up there?
You can do it in Word for the narrative documents, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it will look a little different than the ones that you stamp with PDF. So to clarify what we're talking about, for instance, Exhibit S, you have that narrative response. But then in Exhibit B, you have things like forms that the state gave you. And then in Exhibit J, you have your layout. And there's all these different documents, and they're all different formats. And every single one of them needs to have that exhibit number stamped at the right-hand corner up at the top. So some people are a little picky, and they want it to all look the same, so they won't use Word, and they'll just.
I think it's just a matter of it being up there. I mean, you can write it on there if you need to, and then take a picture of it, put it into a digital file, and we think that'll still work.
I agree, absolutely.
But of course, it's nice to have it nice and neat across the board and even, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You can use hand if you're running into problems. You're running out of time. Handwritten is fine. The state hasn't said any font sizes for the header, that stamp.
Okay.
But we recommend using like 20 or 22 point font, and you bold it so it's really clear. But the state doesn't care about the fonts for other parts of the application. However, they said that they want it to be legible, and then they also said that they prefer 12 point Times New Roman. So
that's what they said? Yeah, so
they prefer that.
Yeah, so use that.
Yeah, we recommend using whatever the state tells you to.
Yeah, always.
They also said that you can use any spacing you want. Given that you get your points based on a limited amount of space, we recommend using single space. I wouldn't go any smaller than single space. Like I wouldn't do 0.75, because then it stops being legible at some point. And you really want your reviewers to like you as they're reviewing your document.
Well, that's quite interesting, because, usually states set that, even Illinois back in 2014 set that. In specific areas, they did want double spaced, and then the rest of it, they didn't want it all single spaced. But going below single space, now becomes a visibility issue. And I think that, because it's the weighing of the difference and balance between how much information I want to put in here to score as many points as possible, and then how I'm going to get it to where the reader will understand everything I'm saying, right? And so definitely want it to be legible, and I agree with you, a single space is probably the best to bring in balance of both worlds, right?
Absolutely. Speaking of keeping your reviewers really happy and liking you, the state said several times, don't submit cover pages, don't do it. I know that you're worried that it's going to be confusing between sections in your exhibits. It's bad writing in general to not include cover pages, but in this instance, we don't want to make them mad, so don't do it. They also said that letters of support won't gain you any points, and they generally prefer not seeing letters of support. So if you really feel like you have to include them, technically you're allowed, but I think that it's going to annoy the reviewers to have extra pages in there that they're not allowed to score.
Let's talk about that for a minute because, I'm sure some folks out there, letters of recommendation and support are always helpful, and they're going to be helpful after this process. If you want a license, going into, the different cities and, helping you, with engaging the community, you're getting, local support, always, a critical strategy. But I do think that, like, what about adding that into the narrative pieces of like the community engagement plan per se?
That sounds like a great plan. So I would recommend saying, hey, we got this letter of recommendation from a prominent person. Remember, you can't talk about their name, but you can talk about their role. They're a state senator, or they're a federal
Community
or US
leader.
senator, whoever they are, local business owner. If they're going to be in the neighborhood of your facility, then absolutely say something like neighbor of the proposed facility. But you can put a little sentence in there so you get the oomph of the letter of recommendation without actually physically including it.
Yeah, within an actual attachment. Understood.
And be aware that the state does pretty thorough investigations. So if you say that, they're going to want to see it.
Oh yeah, and when it comes down to these documents they're submitting, this is a legal document you're submitting, and you're committing to everything that you're saying in there. So, it's really important to read through it all and ensure that you feel that you can follow through with everything that you're going to say you're going to do. I mean, I do think in some cases, if you're going to make changes of some kind, they do allow you to submit some kind of, some kind of, document plus a non-refundable fee, of course, that will allow you to make those changes, right? And so we'll see what happens there. But, like I said, it's important to understand that this is a legal document. You have to follow through with everything. So very important to understand that.
Absolutely. Oh, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but I also strongly recommend those principal officer forms that we were talking about earlier. Get the originals from your team members. Hang on to them. Be organized. The state may ask for them later, and if your team members can't find them because they were like, oh, we don't need the originals for submission, then you can run into problems. So just have them all together in somewhere that you know where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to keep a good organized record of all of that. It's all about record keeping when it comes down to this, because you never know when you're going to need it. You may need it in not even with just the state, but after you win the license, then you got to, a lot of times we see groups that are just, they've been through such a, hard process that they're like, oh, I didn't say that. It's like, yeah, you did. So, I mean, like literally it's important to keep those organized to ensure you always have it, make sure that, the facts are there, right?
Absolutely.
So we got another question that just came through. This person said, we filled our documents out online. We didn't write on it. Is that okay for the original? Okay. So I believe what she's saying is, essentially with the application accelerator, is that okay for the original?
I think that they're actually talking about the forms, the principal officer forms.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's fine. You do have to get it notarized. So that piece has to be done by hand, but the rest definitely can be typed out. Absolutely.
So fill out online, but what about like, do we have to stamp the exhibit too as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's stamping the exhibit of the form, but also getting them notarized.
Right. One thing I forgot to mention about stamping earlier is that Exhibit A has to be stamped, and that's your check, cashier's check or money order, your payment. You have to scan that or make a copy of it and scan the copy and to submit it with your application. So you have to scan it and then put that stamp on it or write it, Exhibit A, on the actual document that you're submitting for your copy of your check, cashier's check or money order. So make sure that you do that in advance. Don't fill out the cashier's check when you're actually submitting, because then you won't.
Yeah, you want to do that in advance, because it's actually got to be on the USB drive, which we're going to go into here in a minute. But as you stated, like you could take a picture of it, or you could scan it, get turned into a digital form, pull it up in Preview, pull up in Acrobat, put the stamp on it, take that, save it, put it into the folder, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about what you have to do when you're submitting. We strongly recommend bringing two sets of applications to submit. You never know. If you drop one, if it's raining or snowing, any number of things can happen. Sometimes the people receiving the applications will test out the USB drive, and if it doesn't work, then you've got a second one right there. So
right, always bring
two full packages, and they're going to be in a 9x12 clasped but not sealed manila envelope. So when you go to buy your manila envelopes, make sure it has the clasps those bronze clasps in it, but also that it has the seal. Just don't lick it. And then in that envelope, well, also don't forget to bring your original payments to the state. They care a lot about that, and it's got to be
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
it's got to be a cashier's check or a money order. They won't take personal checks or credit cards. So
Okay.
make sure to do that in advance, because that takes a little time. You usually have to go somewhere to pick that up, either at the bank or money orders you can get at 7-Eleven and places like that. So in addition to that, you need to bring this envelope that's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's got your USB with each separate exhibit on the USB and nothing else. And it's got to be labeled Exhibit A, Exhibit B. Inside, the PDFs have to be labeled Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. The physical USB flash drive has to also be labeled. You can just use masking tape if you don't have a label maker. And it's got to be labeled with your name, your company name, whatever the applicant name is, and your BLS region. USB drives are pretty small, so it's going to be fun to try and fit it all on there, but that's what they want. When you're picking out a USB flash drive, don't get the 99-cent kind, get the good kind. You really want it to be reusable, and it's probably going to go to the bottom of a box for a while and get jostled around. So make sure it's durable and going to be usable by the state in the future. And then when you're saving all of your files onto the USB drives too, because you're going to do two, take it out of your computer, find somebody else with another computer, stick it in, open up the flash drive, and then open up every single document in there and make sure that you can see it, because sometimes things get corrupted or lost, and that's
right. I mean, I would imagine you want to test this both on Mac and PC.
That's ideal. Not everybody has access to both.
I know, but you know how this goes. I mean, like literally, they could pull it up, and then next thing you know, have a deficiency letter. Oh, your USB drive. We can read it in your material.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
I think that's also a critical test, and doing this over the holidays as well. Very challenging. It's probably one of the first state processes I've seen happen over the holidays, with the deadlines on the 2nd of January.
Yeah, me too. I've never seen this. It's wild.
Right. So, coming back to just a little bit of a recap there. So all the file naming conventions just need to be very basic.
Very basic.
So are they individual folders, or is it just, right as soon as you open up the drive, it's just a list of all the exhibits?
No folders. Good question. No folders, just straight Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, all the way through T. If there are going to be some, this is something that you guys may have covered already, but there are some technically optional exhibits. At Green Rush Consulting, we say there are no optional exhibits.
There are no optional.
Get all of those points.
Or get as many as you can. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I think that most of those are, both of the bonus ones are provided with the Accelerator product.
Oh, great. That's good to hear.
All that's provided. So I think they're okay there. We want to make sure that everybody can score as high as possible.
Wonderful.
Especially with all the odds that are looking at here. So I feel like we've done pretty well on that.
So your envelope is also going to have, it's got your USB that we talked about. It also needs to have the physical application form printed out. You can, as the question was asked earlier, you can type it out, but it does need to be filled out. And you have to physically turn it in. And then you're going to put your cashier's check or money order into the envelope as well. And you're going to make it, of course, you're not going to have two of those. I know that I said 2 packets. Of course, you're only going to have 1 fee, but unless you really wanted to make 2. But that's fine. Just make sure that the copy is in both versions. The submission files. Your cashier's check or money order needs to be made out to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, and that's actually listed on the application form that I was just talking about that you have to print out. If there's more than 1 license available in your BLS region and you're applying for multiple licenses, write down how many licenses you're applying for in that BLS region on your payment, your form of payment.
On the form of payment. Okay.
Yeah, in the memo, they said you may do that. We're recommending doing it. I don't know why they would say you may if they didn't want it. So
may and shall are always a variable when it comes to that legal terminology. So if they say may, you probably want to do it, to ensure that you're accurate, right?
Yeah. And then it's also okay if you're applying for multiple licenses in one BLS region, you can make that payment all in one check. But it's only if you're applying in one BLS region. If they're in multiple, then you need multiple checks.
Interesting.
And when I say check, I mean cashier's check or money order.
Mm-hmm.
So on the outside of that envelope that has clasps and seal, but is not sealed, only clasped, you're going to have the name of the applying company or the name of the applicant if it's a person, the BLS region, the number of licenses you're applying for in that BLS region, and then the name, phone number, and email of your primary contact, and then the name, phone number, and email of an alternate contact. All of this needs to be very legible and clear. If you have the capacity to print it out on a sticker and stick it onto the envelope,
that would be ideal. I would imagine.
That would be ideal, because then you can be sure that they're understanding your writing, or have somebody on your team that has strong writing skills, because that email address is how they're going to contact you. And if you get a deficiency letter, you only have 10 days. 10 days sounds long, but it's really not. And if you lose 3 because you weren't checking your email, or because they sent it to the wrong email address, you're going to be upset about that. As far as physical submission, when you're going to the place to submit at the department, give yourself plenty of time. Parking can be a nightmare, especially as you arrive towards the deadline. January 2nd, parking is going to be horrendous. There are going to be a lot of people trying to apply. So if you can, take a taxi. Even if you need to drive somewhere, you know, a mile or 2 away and then take a cab there, just to give yourself enough time so you're not spending an hour and a half trying to find parking, which is something that has happened in the past.
Right. I mean, I remember I was there in January 2014, and we were in the middle of a blizzard, right? Handling meetings there. So yeah, definitely want to remember to, you know, that there's, parking is a nightmare, and get plenty of time, just plenty of time to do that, and to ensure that you can make it in there, because there will be a long line. Typically there is during this process, and this is something new because it's right after the holidays. And I think that we're probably going to see a huge surge of people coming there, right? I would imagine so.
Absolutely. My guess is the 26th of December through the 2nd are going to be the days when most of the teams apply. So be prepared to sit there all day. I haven't physically submitted this particular application. I know some of you may already have, but some states will actually make you sit there, and they'll go through all of your documents and everything else. It's not just passing in the envelope and walking out. Usually they make you sign something, they take your check, they stamp it, they give you a receipt. There's a whole process, and each team has to do that. And depending on how many people they've hired to physically receive applications, it could take you all day. So don't, make sure you have childcare, and all of that is ready. You're not expected back at work in an hour or so.
Right.
Try to submit a couple of days early if you can. I know that that's a tall order, but that way, if there is a problem when you're submitting, whether it be that you got in a car accident on the way, or your USB drive broke, any number of things can happen. Having a couple of extra days leeway really does help.
And besides, you want to be relaxed on New Year's Eve, just knowing that you already got this in, right? I mean, it's like, so try to shoot for that, guys. So that way you don't run any of those challenges. So we actually had another question come up, and this is a really, really good question. I love this type of stuff. It's like, what if a lot of people have the same score? What kind of tiebreaker do you think they're going to do? I think I've seen there's actually a specific piece to that inside the application instructions. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can. The state said that they're not going to score the community benefits, right? It's a community benefits.
I believe so, yeah.
They're not going to score it unless there's a tie. And then at that point, I believe it's a very small number of points. It may be as small as 2. That they'll score those sections and see who has the best one, and that's how they'll rank the licensees.
Right. It kind of goes down a list, I think, of several. It doesn't it's like the business plan and a few other ones. I think there's several of them in there. This is very much spelled out in the application materials. I remember seeing this, and because for us, we're always thinking about how our clients, would potentially get to that tiebreaker. And, we've seen this happen before. And, there's a couple different ways that we've seen in other states, but they've actually specifically spelled this out. So if it does in the event come to a tiebreaker, it's going to rely on, things like a few other exhibits here, and kind of go down each one until they come to the final result. So, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully you guys win. That's always a good case. But again, being prepared for that tiebreaker, you always want to be prepared for a tiebreaker. Always. I mean, with so many people trying to apply for these licenses, I think that, it's important to always keep them in the focus. I really appreciate that question. That's a really important question.
Absolutely.
So did you have any other wrap up on this submission aspect to this, LP? Because I know that we're just trying to cover every single piece here, in terms of how the application should be submitted. There's some very much detail all the way down to labeling everything, doing your file naming conventions, labeling, each exhibit, even labeling the outside of the manila folder. Was there anything else that was there that's really important for our viewers to understand when it comes to the submission process?
Absolutely. There's a couple more. Any questions that you have, things that have been confusing throughout the process, or what happens next, any of those questions, write them down so that you don't forget them. Bring them with you when you submit. You can ask the people that are there. They may or may not respond to you. They may say they can't tell you. They may say they don't know, but you might actually get a good sense of what their plans are, if there's a timeline, how they're going to determine certain things. Like, feel free to ask lots of questions. Write down the answers and send them to us, and we'll circulate them to all of you so that you can see what we love asking questions during submission, and they actually love it because it breaks up their day. Normally they're just like checking things off and having you sign things, and then
it's like redundant. So
they get to talk a little bit about their job. So definitely engage them. If you feel comfortable, ask them some questions, and if you're comfortable sending us their responses, please do, so that we can share them with other people. And then make sure that both the primary contact and the alternate contact are constantly available via email and phone, because any deficiency letters where anything's wrong with your application, you'll only have 10 calendar days to respond. So make sure that you're aware of that. And if you have any questions or concerns, my name is Lauren Payne. I also go by LP. And my second in command, Lee Wen, is going to be the person who's receiving and fielding and responding to questions via email. And her email address is ly@greenrushconsulting.com. Again, that's ly@greenrushconsulting.com. And she and I will be fielding those questions all the way up through January 2nd, and probably after that. We are going to be closed for the holidays here and there, but because it's submission, we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on things.
Absolutely. And I think referring back to your point about communicating with the department, in terms of submission, I think it's a pretty valuable thing to do as well, just in case you run into any technical issues, and you're communicating with the department, and the department may or may not respond to you, or maybe they do respond to you. They can help you with those instructions on how to do it correctly, starting that early. But second to that, let's just say you run into a conflict or a problem, so you did get to submit your app because of technical issues based on the department. That helps you with a paper trail to have a case to maybe you can also submit later, post submission deadline. It's happened before. So I'm not to say you want to do that. I'm just saying that this is something that you want to think in mind as you're going through this, because they could get a ton of people and not be able to serve everybody. So, I want to ensure that, it's important to understand that. So we did have another question here. He says, as the secure plan was graded by an installer, and he thinks we would get 55 points out of 65 points in the security plan. Is this true? We did have a security, session yesterday, but, again, that's hard to say. I mean, who is this grading the security plan? Have they done dispensary locations before? How many application processes have they gone through creating security plans where they've won and being able to grade upon that? I mean, again, even if you've gone through many of them, this is a whole new process. Right? And we don't have a back-end vision to what the algorithm scoring process looks like. We don't know what the scoring matrix looks like. We don't know who's scoring these. So it's really about, how do you do that, right? So I think that, and basically what he's saying is a 94% success rate. I think that, when it comes down to it, maybe those extra 10 points could be based on the technology It could be based on some more accurate specifics. It could be based on a multitude of different things. But 55 out of 65, that's not too bad.
Yeah,
You know,
I think that making sure that you're, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, taking about a baseline of 55 points out of 65 points, if it's 10-point minimum, we still have time to adjust that. I would say it has to do with the robust technology. Maybe it has to do with, a certain level of procedures or additional procedures that are involved. But I think it's just a little bit more detail there would help that, make it score the highest, essentially.
Yeah, I think it helps to make it a little bit your own. Take it,
Yeah.
add some things that you know about your facility that might make it stand out.
Yeah.
Compared to others. And then another thing to keep in mind is this is one person who did the review and scoring. We don't have the scoring rubric. The state has not released any information about what's going to get points and what's not. Some states give us that, but this state did not. So who knows? We'll see.
Like one of the things with the Accelerator too that which we really wanted to make sure of is to ensure that there was a few pages left, right? Just in case folks have specific customized content they want to put in there, and you're not going over pages and having to reduce it in some way. In this case, if you have 3 to 5 pages or so, that allows you to put things even like pictures in there if you want to, but making sure that your foundation is solid. And so I think that, when it comes down to it, making sure that you can add a few more things in there, do you need to go to the 50 pages? It's always good to try to max out, but is it going to make sure that you score maximum capabilities? I mean, that's, I don't know, maybe not, right? It just really depends on how well the initial content is written. I mean, obviously you don't want to go to like 10-page security plan, right? But we definitely want to, make sure that we have, enough material in there that covers all the bases, right? And maybe that's what the security consultant was saying, was like, okay, well, maybe we can add maybe this or maybe this or maybe this. Now that, the product itself is designed to speed the process up, get the compliance detail down. And if we have a security vendor that comes in and reads it, they're going to be like, okay, well, this is pretty good. 55 out of 65. Let me add my little things in there to get you those 10 points, right? I mean, that's their job. They're here. They're there to bid on your job, right? When it comes to, if you win the license, at that point, they're going to come and install all their equipment. They're going to provide you security guards or however that security vendor set up. And I believe it's just security guards too. I think that's what they were discussing yesterday. And it's not necessarily, technology. If they provide that, that's great. But what the state's looking for in terms of that contract, that vendor contract, is primarily, on-site security.
Yeah.
And that's what I understand too as well.
Yeah.
And he's, explaining about, that's exactly it. So he's like maximizing capabilities are conditioned upon more details versus vagaries. Yeah, just the licensed bodyguard company. So these are all accurate. So like I said, for our viewer out there asking these questions, I'd highly recommend, having your security consultant weigh in a little bit on that application and saying, okay, we can fix this section, or we can add more to this section, or add more to this section. Try to stay away from the legal citations as much as possible without a proper attorney looking at it, that understands the regulations. But when it comes down to it, they can help you populate and get those extra 10 points, 9 points, 8 points, 7 points, whatever you want to look at it. They can help you really customize and help you make that stand out. And that makes me feel really good, because now I know we're providing the right foundational support for these folks to ensure that when they do bring these experts in, or bring these consultants in, or attorney in, we've already sped up the process for them, where they're saving money on their engagement with them, right? So that's fantastic. So that's great. So I think that when it comes down to it, we would just like to see if there's any more questions related to submission, or any of the things we discussed today in this webinar. This is the final piece to our webinar series for this round. We will be doing more, but for this particular round, this is the last one. So we want to ensure we get everybody's questions in here, as we do this, and we want to wish you the best of luck when he goes to applying this license. So if anybody's got any more questions, please feel that now. We'll take it, for a couple more minutes here. So if you could please put that in the chat box, that'd be very helpful. You have anybody? Great. Thank you so much, guys. Looks like we're going to wrap this up. We want to wish everybody a safe and happy holiday. If you have any more questions, we do provide free email support, during this process. Again, as LP stated, we will have limited hours over the holidays. We will be open and be serving calls. We will definitely be doing email support. But if anybody needs any support, in terms of that, please just give us a call. Our number is 510-479-7327, or you can email us at services@greenrushconsulting.com. Now, one last question. Is there an exhibit that requires financial? I believe that we went over that earlier. What was that, Exhibit O?
I believe it's Exhibit O, yeah.
Yeah, Exhibit O. So,
it doesn't require submitting proof of capitalization. You don't have to include bank information, but you do have to include a pro forma and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he's explaining that he says they made us do the 5-year plan. So is that required for the state?
I don't have my thing in front of me, but I believe it is, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a 5-year projection, and so, doing that again, like, that's just to show that you have, the ability to, like, did you know what you're talking about in terms of how much money you're trying to spend, what your capital expenditures are, what does that look like in terms of your personnel, your salaries, and how are you going to be able to do that? Now, in terms of like the flip side of that, if you have the investment, that goes in Exhibit O, yes. If you put it, you have the investment on the other side showing your proof of capitalization, you just want to make sure that's more than that, right? As we explained earlier. So again, like we explained a lot of this earlier, I think that all of these webinars will be available for review later because we're recording everything. So I think that we can send it all out to you guys, and you guys can catch anything that you didn't miss. Maybe you missed one of the last webinars, all chock full of very important information that's very helpful. And again, we appreciate all you guys. We wish you the best of luck and the best of holidays and everything else. Just try to get it done as quickly as possible.
I see one more question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where the link is for the recorded webinars, but we will be sending them out.
Correct.
Make sure that they get sent out again to the entire list of Accelerator clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll send it out to you guys. So happy holidays. Thank you so much from Green Rush Consulting. I really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you guys' success.